The whiskey sour is one of the great drinks of the world. It's whatever you want it to be. If you don't like whiskey, no problem. Take a sip. There's whiskey in here? This is delicious. And if you do like whiskey, even better. That's what's so great about the whiskey sour. There's a perfect version for everybody. I'm Jason O'Brien, lead mixologist at Addison and Robb Report's resident cocktail columnist. And this are 3 different ways to make the perfect whiskey sour. The whiskey sour, at its core, is whiskey made refreshing. It's whiskey in a Panama hat. Some spirits are intrinsically designed for refreshment. Pisco, rum, tequila, the things made in tropical climates tend to be tropical. Whiskey resists this, and so to get it to play nice with lemon juice is very much a magic trick. Now the problem is the tannins. Whiskey is aged in oak barrels, and oak has tannins. And tannins, like in a big red wine, like in coffee or in chocolate, tannins are astringent. They're the things that kind of attack the sides of your mouth. And tannins in an alcoholic solution that is very cold stick out like a lump in a rug, and there's really nothing you can do about it. And so when you make a whiskey sour with bourbon or rye, you need to do something about the tannins. So I'm going to show you 3 ways to attack this problem. The first is the classic whiskey sour that uses egg whites to bind to the tannins and give it a velvety texture. Then an eggless sour that uses a whiskey that doesn't have very many tannins to begin with. And finally, the juicy sunshine version that uses an egg white but also a couple extra things to really lean into the refreshing qualities. So let's get started with the classic. To make the classic whiskey sour, you start with bourbon. I'm gonna grab Elijah Craig small batch here. So we think of bourbon as the sweeter spectrum versus the spicier spectrum. Sweeter, by the way, doesn't have any sugar added. It's just more proportion of corn in the mash bill, translates to a slightly sweeter palate. What I like about Elijah Craig is that it's right down the middle. It's between those 2 poles. And so it's kind of got something for everybody. It's a good all-purpose cocktail bourbon. So to start our whiskey sour, we're gonna need 2 ounces of bourbon. Now the proof here is also a little important. This has more dilution than most drinks because we're going to be adding an egg white, which is a full ounce of liquid. And so you want it to be robust. You don't want an 80 proof bourbon here. Fortunately, most bourbons that you'll grab are going to be a little bit elevated. This is 94 proof and it's going to be perfect. But also good would be Buffalo Trace at 45, Maker's Mark is 45. There's a lot of good bourbons that you can use. Next is a fresh lemon juice, the sour in the whiskey sour. So you want lemon instead of lime. Whiskey tends to not want to be mixed with lime. You save that for your more tropical applications, your rum or tequila. Because this is such a simple drink, there's really nowhere to hide. There's no better way to make your drink great than to use fresh lemon juice. And we'll need 3/4 of an ounce of lemon juice. Now, even though it's called a whiskey sour, just lemon juice won't do. So we need a little bit of simple syrup to balance the lemon. And simple syrup is as sweet as lemon juice is sour, so we need 3/4 of an ounce of it. And in the classic whiskey sour, we control the tannins with an egg white. So, tannins like to bind to protein, and if you give them an egg white, they'll bind to the egg white as opposed to binding to your mouth, which is what makes them astringent. So we crack an egg white. Make sure to crack it in the other tin, not the one you made the drink in, just in case you get pieces of shell or you drop the yolk or something. You don't have to throw out the drink. You can just kind of deal with it all on its own. Now, the only annoying thing about working with eggs is that you have to shake it once before you add ice and then shake it once after. So we call this a dry shake. So we're gonna put the tins together and shake without ice to whip the egg about 5 seconds or so. Remember to hold it tight. You see the egg white is nice and frothy. And now we add ice and shake properly. There's more liquid to chill, so you want to shake for a solid 8 to 10 seconds. So ordinarily I would insist on fine straining when something is up like this. The reason I don't do it with whiskey sours is because when you try them side by side, the one that's fine strained costs you some of the foam. It makes the foam less luxurious and less silky. So what I do is make sure that I'm holding my finger on the strainer down like this. So this is open gate. I want to close the gate in order to keep all of the bits of ice and lemon pulp in the tin, but still have the luxurious texture. And over the course of a minute or so, the egg white forms a frothy little head on top, which we like to decorate with drops of Angostura bitters. And this is the classic whiskey sour. But what if you don't feel like drinking an egg white today? Fair enough. Well, then what you want to do is start with a spirit that doesn't have a ton of tannins to begin with. And so for that, we grab Canadian whiskey, or in this case, Irish whiskey. Now this is Redbreast 12, a single pot still Irish whiskey. Even though this whiskey is 12 years old, they don't use new barrels in Ireland or Scotland or Canada or really anywhere except America. And what that means is that even though it is older than these two, it will have fewer tannins, so you can shake it without an egg white. It'll still stick out a little, but it won't be nearly as much as a bourbon or a rye. So to make one, start with a cocktail shaker. You want to add 2 ounces of whiskey. And once again, we need the sour, so 3/4 of an ounce of lemon juice. Next, your simple syrup. An eggless whiskey sour can still be amazing, but it does require you to use real ingredients. That means that you have to take the sour mix that's been in the back of your cupboard since 1989 and throw it away. So because I'm going to serve this one on ice, I'm only going to shake for 6 or 8 seconds because it will continue to dilute and get colder once it's served. Grab a rocks glass of your choosing and strain into a rocks glass over fresh ice. And for a garnish, I like to do it like the way it would be done in bars across the country, with an orange slice and a cherry. This is the Eggless Whiskey Sour. And finally, we have what I call the juicy whiskey sour for when you want a cocktail that's extra refreshing. This is Wild Turkey 101 rye. It is a Kentucky-style rye, which is to say it has a large amount of corn as well in the mash bill. So it's mostly rye, 51% by law, a bunch of corn, and a little bit of barley. And what that means is that it'll have a big kind of almost a bourbon profile, but it'll be more grain forward, it'll be spicier, and it'll be more herbaceous. What that means in a whiskey sour is it'll tease out the green herbal notes a lot more. And we need 2 ounces of it. A similar product would be Rittenhouse rye. Old Overholt makes a bonded rye that's 100 proof. Just like the classic, we want this to be elevated in proof to stand up to the amount of dilution it's gonna see. So just like before, we're using 3/4 of an ounce of fresh lemon juice. Unlike the others, we are adding another ingredient, orange. Now the nice thing about this is that orange juice blends perfectly into the flavors of a whiskey sour. You might not even know it was there if I didn't tell you, but what it does is make it extra refreshing and extra juicy. It gives it a juicy character that is irrepressible and delicious. And we only need about a 1/2 ounce to achieve that little trick. And once again, we're gonna grab our simple syrup to balance the tartness of the lemon. But unlike the others, we need to use a little bit less because the orange can be quite sweet, so I'm only gonna do a 1/2 ounce. Just like the classic, we're gonna need an egg white. Pasteurized eggs work here. They work like a carton of egg whites that you can get at the store. Works fine. If you are vegan, but still want this trick, aquafaba is the liquid in a can of chickpeas. This works great. Next, put them together, and normally you would dry shake, but I'm gonna show you a small trick if you wanna make it extra frothy. If you can get yourself a milk frother that has a whisk attachment, this does a particularly good job with egg white cocktails. Just froth it for about 10 seconds, if that. Add ice and give it a good shake for 8 to 10 seconds. And as a final trick, to go particularly well with the orange and to lean into the herbaceousness, a rinse of absinthe. You can add a teaspoon of absinthe to the cocktail itself before you shake it. What I like to do is add a little bit to the glass and just rinse it. You coat the inside of the glass, which helps to make it even more aromatic. Yep, that's absinthe. Now to lean into the refreshing qualities here, I'm going to serve it on a big piece of ice and strain. Egg whites can sometimes have a bit of a smell to the top after about 5 or 6 minutes, and that's why we put bitters on the top, not only because it looks pretty, not only because it's delicious, but because it helps mitigate that smell. It doesn't always happen, but when it does happen, the bitters really help. This is the juicy whiskey sour. So these are the 3 ways that I would make a whiskey sour. Now, when I'm gonna have one, when I'm thinking about it, if I've been daydreaming about a whiskey sour, this is the one that I'm daydreaming about. It tastes the most classic to me, and it is elegant in its simplicity and really showcases the whiskey while simultaneously making it refreshing. It's like a magic trick. This is the one that I would give somebody who didn't want a fancy cocktail, they just wanted a whiskey sour. This is very no nonsense. I'm sure you know somebody like that, and they would love this. And then finally, this is the one, if I want something extra refreshing, if I want to lean into the summery vibes of it, I'm making a juicy version because it is so irrepressibly summery and refreshing. But whichever your preference is, there is a whiskey sour for you. For more cocktail recipes, head to robbreport.com.